Hey, welcome back to CKLA Chats. I am DLC Foster-Yankey, and this video is all about Lesson 1, The Power of Shared Ideas, and 5th grade Unit 6, The Reformation. Hey. So we'll begin by discussing our core text for this lesson. There are two. The first is The Power of the Church, and the second is The Power of the Printed Word. And students will be reading the former, The Power of the Church, to learn about how powerful the church became in the Middle Ages, and the latter, The Power of the Printed Word, to learn how the printing press came to exist and the impact of its invention. So the first component of Lesson 1 is core connections. It is divided into 4 subcomponents that total 45 minutes, or about half of your 90-minute reading block. The first subcomponent is review prior knowledge for 5 minutes. This section is all about students connecting learning from previous grades and units. For example, the 3rd grade Roman Empire unit and 4th grade Middle Ages unit. But as we all know, our current 5th graders did not participate in CKLA in grades 3 and 4. So we can't ask them what they remember about those units. What we can do is upload short videos to Schoology for students to watch prior to this lesson. There's a great brain pop on the fall of the Roman Empire, and a quick search will yield dozens of videos about the Middle Ages. I would recommend sharing one focused on the power of the church in that time period, since that will be the connection developed in this unit. Okay, so once students have been exposed to something to build some type of background knowledge, the teacher is going to display a 3-column chart, which is what's on the pink sticky note there on the slide. And the teacher will ask students what they know about the Roman Empire, the Middle Ages, and the Renaissance, with the main focus being on the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Students will share what they know, and the teacher will add it to the charts. The teacher will then ask students to locate and identify modern-day Spain, France, England, Germany, and Italy on the map of Western Europe, which is also displayed there on the slide, reminding students that at least parts of these countries were included in the Roman Empire, and that the time period in the history of Western Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire is called the Middle Ages. Students will discuss in small groups what they recall about the Renaissance, and then they'll share out with the class. The teacher will capture a few main concepts in the 2nd column on the 3-column chart, and that students know they're going to add to the chart throughout the lesson. Okay. Then the teacher is going to move on to some review about timelines by asking the class questions about where the different eras on that 3-column chart belong on the timeline, and then placing the Renaissance timeline card in the correct place. They'll do a check for understanding, where they'll poll the class to ask what BCE and CE stand for, just to make sure that students understand how time works on a timeline. And then the students will work one-on-one with the teacher, with a partner, or independently to study the timeline and formulate sentences to briefly describe the time periods and their relationship to one another using sequence words. For example, which one comes first, next, last. Several students will then share out with the class after they've had an opportunity to work on that. Okay, then we'll go to the next subcomponent of core connections. The teacher will introduce the new unit, what it's called and what it's about. They'll ask what root is in the word Reformation and what reform means, and then explain what Reformation means. And that this unit will focus on a time period in European history in which some people decided that something needed to be improved, and they took steps to try to reform it. Then they'll move on to a whole group reading of The Power of the Church. This will take about 30 minutes. This reading is an excerpt from the 4th grade Middle Ages unit. And like I mentioned earlier, when we talked about the core text, the purpose is for them to learn about the influence of the Christian church in the Middle Ages. So students will take turns reading, listening for info to add to the Middle Ages column of the 3-column chart. The teacher will read the chapter title and the big question, which is what practices in the Middle Ages show the influence and power of the church. And like I said, instruct students to listen carefully so they can answer the big question. The teacher will also point out that in the title, the C in church is capitalized because it refers to a specific church, the Christian church. And as students are taking turns reading the chapter, the teacher is asking literal and inferential questions to guide them towards realizing the huge role the church played in the Middle Ages. Then they're going to wrap up core connections, about 5 minutes, by returning to the 3-column chart to adjust and add info. The teacher is going to ask about similarities and differences between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and how the church was an important part of those periods. Students will discuss in a think, pair, share while the teacher circulates, listening in on their conversations. And several pairs will share out about their discussions. Then the teacher will tell the students they'll add more information after reading more about the Reformation. And that brings us to the second component of lesson 1, reading. So the reading component is divided into 3 subcomponents, which will total the other 45 minutes of our 90-minute reading block. We have a cup. Students will know what Reformation means. They'll understand that Gutenberg's printing press contributed to the start of the Reformation, and they'll be able to demonstrate comprehension of the power of the church by describing and writing the Reformation as compared with earlier time periods using a 3-column chart. Okay, so to begin the reading components, there'll be a read aloud of chapter 1 for 30 minutes. The teacher will introduce the reader by reading the title and having students discuss what the word shift in the title, I think it's called shifts in power. So students will discuss what that means with a partner. Then the teacher will give examples of the word shift and a definition. Then explain that the reader title shift in power means changes in power. The teacher will tell students the reader is mostly informational, but it does contain a literary chapter. And then have students preview the text by flipping through, looking at the different images, reading the chapter titles on the table of contents, and commenting on what they see. Then the teacher will have students use the table of contents to find and turn to the first chapter, preview the vocabulary words that they're going to encounter, and have a student read the big question, which is, why was Gutenberg's invention of a printing press so important? The teacher is going to make sure that the students understand what the question is asking. Then the teacher will begin to read the chapter aloud as students follow along. The teacher will stop throughout to discuss some inferential, literal, and evaluative questions. Okay. So this is a list of some of the types of questions the teacher will be asking throughout the read aloud. Questions about the process of making a book before the printing press was invented, who had access to books, how Gutenberg got the idea for the printing press, how it was similar to Chinese and Korean methods of printing, why Gutenberg chose to print the Bible, why more people were able to read books in Europe at this time, how the printing press was like the internet, how there were some who didn't like the change, for example, the government and the church, why the government and church were worried about the printing press. They'll make a prediction about what changes likely lie ahead due to the invention of the printing press. And finally, that big question, why was the printing press so important? Okay, so every question the teacher's asking throughout the read aloud is building up to them understanding why the printing press was so important. Okay, and then they'll do a check for understanding. The teacher will ask, how did Gutenberg's printing press influence the church and the Reformation movement? And how is the title of the last section of the reader, the power of communication, related to your answer? So students will discuss that in a think, pair, share while the teacher circulates and listens in on their discussions. And then several pairs will share out with the class. To wrap up reading for 10 minutes, the class is going to return to their 3-column chart to adjust and add info. Students are going to capture information on their own 3-column chart on notebook paper, or I guess the teacher could have printed one out for them so they don't have to spend time drawing that. But they're going to make their own notes on their own charts. They'll do a think, pair, share to discuss the 3 time periods, the shifts that started during the Reformation, and the role of the printing press, while the teacher circulates and listens. And then pairs will be selected to share out about their discussions. The students will add more ideas to their charts, and the teacher will collect those. Okay, they have some word work for 5 minutes over the word revolutionize. For this component, the teacher will use the word in context, using a sentence from the reader that had the word in it. We'll have students repeat the word after them, give students the definition, a sample sentence, and ask for examples of things that have revolutionized life today. Students will use the word in their response. Then 2 to 3 students will use revolutionize in a sentence. The teacher will ask for the part of speech and follow up with a discussion activity with the partner where students discuss an object, tool, or invention that has revolutionized life and how. And of course, they'll use the word revolutionize in their discussion. For take-home material, they have activity page 1.3, which is an excerpt from chapter 1 with some vocabulary activities. And they also have a glossary page for reference. That is activity page 1.4. Okay, and that concludes lesson 1. Okay, I hope it was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.